prove the rule. I mean, you know, this could very well be interpreted as an attempt by the administration to get out from under the claim that they're colluding with Russia. But the bottom line is that, you know, we don't really know. There are a lot of things that Trump has done that seem like they're playing right into the hands of Putin. We ought to just find out, Tucker, and I think you and I ought to be able to agree on that.
So increasing the size of our nuclear arsenal, deregulating the energy sector, backing the Keystone Pipeline, these are all things that the Russians hate, and for good reason. And yet you're saying that still there's no evidence that Trump is not in the pocket of Putin. Even when he bombs a country where Russian troops are stationed now, propping up the regime of Bashar al-Assad, that's not enough evidence for you that he's not Putin's puppet?
Right. Right, and called the Russians to make sure they got their troops out of the way. I mean, I'm on the Armed Services Committee. He didn't consult with us before doing that, but he did feel it fine to call the Russians. So it's hard to say that he wasn't concerned about the Russian troops. The bottom line is this: I could give you a long list of things that Trump has done with Russia.
You just said it. Let me just back you up and get you to explain what you just suggested. Are you saying that this was part of an elaborate ruse, that in fact he was working with the Russians, I think you suggested a minute ago, to divert attention from this diabolical conspiracy you've been alleging, that this was a Potemkin bombing, a fake bombing, designed to fool the rest of us into thinking they're not really in league with each other?
No, look, I didn't say it was I confirmed that as an explanation. I said that is a believable, viable explanation, which is no different than what you're saying. I mean, there's a lot of evidence. I mean, we've heard investigation after investigation uncover stones that have Trump administration officials colluding with contacting intelligence officials with the Russians and then lying about it. I mean, we've heard that with Jared Kushner. We've heard that with Jeff Sessions.
We've heard that
with a long list.
Well, so this conspiracy is a lot deeper than I thought it was. So you're saying, I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, members of the Trump administration met with Russian officials. That kind of thing happens a lot. Maybe it's ominous, maybe it's not.
Well, it's a lie about it. And that's an important thing.
That's fine. No, but you're saying now that the military action we just saw on Thursday night may have been coordinated with the Russians to throw sleuths like you off the scent. That appears to be what you're saying. And that just seems like a huge conspiracy to me.
Well, it's a conspiracy if it's a conspiracy, but the reality is I'm just giving it to you as a plausible explanation. No, that's why I said I'm not going to confirm it. Look, I know you would love for me to say that and confirm it. I'm just saying that there are people who think that. There are Americans who think that.
Who are they?
And that's as logical an explanation as any as you've given for Trump not colluding with the Russians. So look, the bottom line is
who are these Americans who think that this was a fake military action designed to throw people off the scent? Who thinks that? I mean, you said,
well, I'll tell you, a lot of the people, well, I'll tell you, there's a majority of Americans who want an independent investigation into what's going on.
That's very different from what you're saying.
And it's hard to understand, Tucker, why you're opposed to that. Why are you opposed to having an independent, bipartisan investigation into what's going on?
You're trying to change the subject. I'm not arguing against an independent, bipartisan investigation. If you could put one together, I guess I'd be for it. But you're saying that there are people who
I just want to make sure you're on the record for that.
Now we're getting into tinfoil hat territory. There are people who believe that Putin and Trump got together and said, hey, I have an idea. To throw Congressman Moulton off the trail, why don't we pretend to be in conflict with each other? Why don't we have the Prime Minister of Russia? Did you see this? This is what Medvedev said. This puts us on the verge of a military clash. Our relations are completely ruined. Do you think he's just faking it? He's just saying that for public consumption to fool you?
Tucker, that's very flattering that you think Donald Trump is concerned about my particular views on the issue. But all I'm saying is that we don't know. We don't know what's going on here. But what we ought to talk about is what we can agree on, which is that Trump actually, I mean, look, here I'm a Democrat from Massachusetts telling you that I support Trump's action. I support Trump's action in Syria. But I'm also saying that the Constitution demands that any further action requires Congress to come together in a bipartisan way and authorize that. And that's what we should be talking about here. Where is the end game? Where is Trump going with this?
Those are all fair questions.
That's actually the important question.
No, the important question is you are suggesting the President of the United States coordinated a military attack on a country with the knowledge of Russia in order to divert attention away from the Russian election hacking scandal. And that's a conspiracy so grand, so complex, so baroque that I stand in awe of the possibility that that's real. And I stand in awe of the fact that you think that's possibly real, and I sit awaiting the name of one person who agrees with you that that possibly happened. Just one. Tell me one person who who is saying this.
You know what, Tucker? I just threw that out as an alternative hypothesis. I didn't say that they were actually colluding with Russia. I'm just saying that maybe this is a way for them to say, we're willing to stand up to the Russian regime. You're implying that they would be colluding with Russia. Maybe you know something about the Trump-Russia connections that even I don't know.
But the bottom line... No, you said he called us in Congress, he called Putin. What's the point of that? What were you implying? I mean, the bottom line is... You're implying there's a conspiracy, which apparently you think there is.
The bottom line is, Tucker, that what Trump has done in Syria is okay, but some of the things that he's done in the past are not, and some of the things that his administration officials and his campaign officials have done in the past are not. And we ought to be willing to just address that in a bipartisan way,
look,
in a way that says, you know what, Russia is an enemy of the United States. Russia is an enemy of the United States.
You've said
Let's
Russia
be
is
willing
the
to stand up to them.
Enemy. Hold on. We just bombed Syria. There are Russian troops in Syria supporting the government who we're seeking to get out of the way. Overthrow.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so again, we're back to your conspiracy, but let's just get to facts really quick. You said recently, and again, it's on your website as of tonight, that Russia is America's number one enemy. Number one enemy. So you would put Russia above ISIS, for example. You think Russia's a greater threat to America than ISIS?
Well, I think in the long run, Russia is, and there's a couple reasons for that. One is that they're very clearly trying to undermine our democracy in ways that ISIS does not have the capability of doing. And the other that, of course, Russia has a nuclear arsenal that is targeted at us at this very moment. And that's why they're dangerous.
But it has been targeted at us since 1947.
Russia is an enemy very seriously.
Okay, so but you think... I just want to
look, Russia is in violation of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty right now, Tucker, and this administration hasn't done anything about it. How do you explain that? Oh, who cares about a nuclear weapons treaty? Okay. I'll tell you, President Reagan sure cares about that. I mean, he would be rolling over in his grave if he knows that Trump's not standing up to the Russians on this. Look, so the bottom line is that we ought to be able to come together on the fact that Russia is an enemy and we stand up to them.
Point 9 times, but let me, you haven't answered.
Well, maybe you just don't like it, Tucker, but it's not a talking point, it's a reality.
I'm agreeing with you, Congressman. That's fine. You just haven't answered why, if the president's doing the bidding of the Russians, our greatest enemy, worse than ISIS, then why is he seeking to expand the American nuclear arsenal? Why is he taking money from domestic programs and putting it toward the Pentagon? Why is he pushing NATO, our NATO partners to put more into their own defense? Those are not things the Russian government wants. They're the opposite of what the Russian government wants. Contend with the facts and get back to me on how that all squares up.
Well, look, you can give plenty of things that you like about what Trump is doing.
I don't even like those things. I'm just telling you, Russia doesn't like them.
Well, look, I was sitting on the Armed Services Committee a week ago when we had a bipartisan hearing where we talked about the fact that Trump is trying to cut the State Department budget and a lot of programs that are used to counter Russian influence in Eastern Europe.
I'm sorry,
and
I think
one of the things a Republican veteran stood up and says, look, you hear veterans on both sides of the aisle saying this is not helpful for our national security. So I can give you a long list of things that Trump is doing that are not helpful to our national security either.
And you may be right,
at least I'm here saying he did one thing right, which is to take this action against Assad when he used chemical weapons.
My own view is the opposite is true. This is the one wrong thing, but whatever. Congressman, thanks a lot for coming on and explaining your views.
Thanks,
I appreciate it. We want to give you a brief update on whether foreign countries are sending us their best or, as one former candidate put it, people with a lot of problems. There's been a shift in federal law enforcement over the past decade that few have noticed. In 2004, 57% of federal arrests were of American citizens, while 43% were of non-citizens. In 2014, a decade later, that's the most recent year for which we have full data, the numbers were flipped. Non-citizens were 61% of arrests, while citizens were just 39%. Now, the surge in non-citizen arrests was because, in part, of a big increase of arrests at the border for offenses like human smuggling and unlawful reentry. In fact, there's been an absolute explosion of people who are caught entering the U.S. again and again. It's not just that we become more punitive. More people are coming. In 1992, 690 people were convicted of unlawful entry into this country. In 2014, 16,556 people were convicted, an increase of almost 24 times. And again, not because the Obama administration was a lot tougher, there were just a lot more criminals to arrest. In 73.2% of cases, these people, the ones who got arrested, had a prior criminal history in this country. They may be coming here for a better life, but in a lot of cases, it will be at our expense, at least in those cases. Up next, United Airlines trying to defend its policies after it violently yanked a man off a flight, leaving him bloodied. We'll talk to a passenger who was there and saw the whole thing. Also, heroin is killing people at a rate 5 times higher than crack did in the 80s. How did this happen? What role has the government played in that? And why is so little being done? Our special series will look for answers. I'll also talk to someone who says the U.S. government is heavily responsible. Stay tuned. Well, flying out of an American airport can already be hell on earth, and on Sunday, one unfortunate passenger finally reached the 9th circle of it. United Flight 3411 was scheduled to fly from Chicago to Louisville, Kentucky. It was overbooked, though, and in order to make room for several employees of the airline, United kicked off several passengers. One man refused to go. He said he was a doctor and he had to meet with patients the next day. So United did the only sensible thing and sent in the police, who did this. Watch.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! No! Guys, my God! What are you doing? No, this is wrong! Oh my God! Look at what you did to him! Oh my God!
Tyler Bridges was on that flight and shot the video you just saw. He joins us now. Tyler, thanks for coming on. With videos like these, you wonder if there's a missing context or there's something you didn't see that explains it. You were there. Is this what it looks like?
Yeah, pretty much. So there was some build-up to get to this point. You know, prior to the man being drug off, United employees had made several announcements, you know, saying 4 passengers had to get off the plane before we were going to leave Chicago, and that we couldn't leave unless 4 people got off, so United staff could get on the plane to make it to Louisville. And then ultimately they said they would randomly select people based on an internal algorithm that weighs in cost of the ticket and who was the last to purchase, and that's how they picked the 4 people that were removed from the plane. The gentleman in the video, he was actually the 3rd person they asked to get off the flight. Prior to him, a younger couple was asked to leave by the United gate agent, and they begrudgingly left the plane. And then the gate agent went to the man in the video and told him he had to get off the plane, at which time he said he was a doctor, he had patients he had to see in the morning, he wasn't going to get off the plane. And the gate agent was like, you have to get off the plane. If you don't get off, I'm calling security. And he was like, fine, call security. I'm not getting off the plane. And
wow.
then the 2 initial security police officers that came on the plane, they tried to reason with the man. They were real calm. You know, they went about it in a good way. And he would not reason with them. He was committed to not getting off the plane.
Was he violent in any way that you saw?
He was, so when the 3rd officer came on, that was the one that ultimately removed him, he was yelling at them, he was trying to fend them off the best he could to, you know, I guess he felt like he had to do whatever he could to stay on the plane. But he wasn't hitting the officers, but he was kind of wailing his arms and trying to keep them away from him.
Wow.
And then ultimately they had to use the force, as you can see in the video.
Well, they used a lot of
pull him off.
We've got video.
Yeah.
So he was taken off the plane. Then for some reason he came back on the plane. I think we can show it.
Right.
And it's clear from it that he's in pretty bad shape physically. I think this might be it right here. He's bloodied.
Yeah, that part was really unbelievable for us on the plane. It was wild enough that they pulled this man off. You know, he was unconscious when they pulled him off the plane. And in between him being pulled off, the United staff that was, you know, they had to clear the seats for, they came on the plane and they were berated by the passengers on the plane, as you can imagine. A lot of people were saying, you know, you should be embarrassed for working for this company, you should be ashamed of yourself. You know, this man had just been drugged off the plane to make room for these
So here's the response from Oscar Munoz. He's the CEO of United Airlines. He said, this is an upsetting event to us here at United. I apologize for having to reaccommodate these customers. Does that look like reaccommodation to you? There's no mention of the fact this guy is bloodied and unconscious. That's reaccommodation, according to United Airlines.
Yeah, they definitely could have handled this in a better way, and they definitely could have done more for these people that had to take off the plane. Not just the man that was removed, but the other folks. United you know, no one wanted to volunteer to get off the plane because the next flight wasn't until 2 p.m. the next day, which is almost a full 24 hours later.
What's so striking is it's 4 hours away. Why didn't you hear in the tape you shot a woman say, "Why don't you just drive, United employees? It's close." Why didn't they?
Right. I'm not sure, but a lot of passengers were kind of yelling that to United employees when they came on the plane, and you know, people were really kind of up in arms at what was going on around them on the plane.
Have you read the short story "The Lottery" by Shirley Jackson?
I have not, no.
Where they pick someone at random and stone them to death? I don't know why this reminds me of that. Tyler, it's great to see you tonight. Thank you for your video, and thank you for telling us what you saw.
No problem. Thanks a lot.
Well, up next, Egypt has close to 10 million Christians, and they are besieged by radical Muslims who want them exterminated. Why doesn't the press seem to care much about what's happening to them? We'll talk about it with Piers Morgan. He joins us next. It has the largest Christian community in the Middle East and one of the oldest in the world. It predates Islam, of course, by hundreds of years. But that community is now under siege, truly. On Sunday, at least 44 people were killed in a pair of suicide bombings targeting Palm Sunday celebrations in churches. We've got some footage of that attack, which is pretty awful. It was one of the latest of many attacks on the Egyptian minority, the Christian minority there. And yet the American press doesn't seem to care much about it, the obliteration of the Middle East's once large Christian population. The question is, why don't they care? We're joined now by Piers Morgan. He's editor-at-large at dailymail.com. Piers, thanks a lot for coming on. So you sent out a tweet right after this saying, this will not get the attention of massacres in Europe, but it should. Why won't it, do you think?
I think, unfortunately, you know, if it happens in the Middle East, this kind of atrocity, it just does not seem to attract the kind of media attention in America that it would if it happened, as we've seen in the attacks in Sweden the last few days, in London 2 weeks ago. I was there for that. Huge attention in the American media. You know, in Paris, in Nice, these get huge attention. And yet what happened in Egypt was unbelievably significant. You know, if you look at what ISIS really stands for, what they are carrying out now in the Middle East and in Egypt in particular is a kind of genocidal attack on Christians and Christianity. They want Christianity eradicated, and they want to convert all Muslims to their crusade. They want it to be a holy war, and they want Christians gone. And I don't think that narrative is getting the attention it should get in the American media, and I have to say in other media as well around the world.
What's so strange is the West is primarily Christian, predominantly. I mean, that's what makes it the West. And yet there's this sense that it's somehow wrong to root for the home team. When something happens to Christians abroad, it's somehow, I don't know, impolite to mention it because it's self-interested. Have you noticed this?
Right. I mean, look, you know, ISIS couldn't be more transparent. After the attack in St. Petersburg last week, they made it absolutely clear. This is a war against the cross. They said that. That was what the statement said. They are at war in their heads with Christianity, not just with Christianity. They're at war with all other religions as well. But they have been singling out in increasingly virulent terms that their real war now is against Christians and the cross. You know, I'm a Catholic. You know, the Pope Francis is due to go to Egypt in 2 weeks' time. I'm concerned about his safety. After what happened on Palm Sunday, I'm concerned about the Pope's safety. He would be a massive target, a massive prize for these Islamist terrorists. And they've made it very clear that he is a #1 target for them in their battle against Christians. You know, they attacked a church where the Coptic Pope was actually officiating. So they have made their intentions clear. Now, I think this is a huge story. This is the kind of story that ought to be dominating cable news in America. It should be dominating headlines around the world. The press in America should be full of headlines about this. This narrative, to me, is very straightforward. ISIS have declared war on Christianity. I'm not seeing that being covered enough.
No, basically no one is covering it here. I think you're in the UK right now, but you can just imagine the silence this has been greeted by. You know, here and there a story. Part of the problem is there are no spokesmen for this. So if almost any other group was under attack, you would have people calling up TV stations and saying, put me on, I represent this group. Where are the leaders of Christian churches in America, in the West, standing? I mean, I don't want to single anyone out by name, Archbishop of Canterbury, but like, where are they? Why aren't they saying something?
Well, I couldn't agree more with you. And they're very quick, these leaders, to come off and get on the airways and talk about other atrocities. You know, when a handful of people were killed in London, I was there. I worked literally 500 yards from Westminster Bridge. So I was there within hours of that happening. And I was struck by the immediate race by religious figures to come and talk about this in public. But where are they now after what happened in Egypt? Why is that not deemed to be hugely significant? And the death toll was far higher, the number of wounded was far higher, and yet it seems to be, in the eyes of the global media and global religious leaders, not to be as important as these kind of wannabe jihadis that we're seeing, who probably spend too much time on the internet getting into trucks and mowing people down. Well, yeah, they're dangerous people and they're hideous atrocities, and obviously our thoughts go with the people that they kill and maim and the rest of it. But actually what happened in Egypt, to me, with these attacks on these two Coptic churches, was hugely more significant in the overall war. It looked very tactical by ISIS. It looked like they'd sent in highly trained people to do this. And it looked a far more coordinated part of a much bigger plot by them to take on Christianity, as was the attack in St. Petersburg. They said it, like I said. They said this was an attack on the cross. But again, the coverage of St. Petersburg, the coverage in Egypt, not as high as the coverage of a handful of people being killed in Sweden and London. And I ask simply, why?
I think that's... Thank you for being such a clear voice in this. Not to mention the Christians in Iraq who have basically been exterminated. Piers Morgan, editor-at-large, dailymail.com. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Duncan.
Up next, what would happen if 9/11 happened every single month? Well, that's about the death toll we are now suffering in this country from opioid addiction. After the break, we'll bring you the first part of a week-long series on the worst drug crisis in American history. Plus, Hillary Clinton says she's only unpopular with so many people because she's so unbelievably successful. People hate success in this country, says Hillary Clinton. Our panel will discuss if that's really the reason. Stay tuned. America is quietly in the midst of the worst drug epidemic in the history of the country. Tonight we bring you the first installment of a week-long series called Drugged, looking at the story of America's opioid crisis. Slightly more than 500,000 Americans live in Montgomery County, Ohio, a place most famous for being home to the Wright brothers, inventors of modern flight. But it was there, earlier this year, that the coroner's office was forced to lease space at a nearby funeral parlor. It didn't have room for the growing number of corpses killed by opioids. 160 miles away in Huntington, West Virginia, a much smaller town, 28 overdose patients arrived at local hospitals in just 4 hours. Those are just two examples of what constitute the worst drug epidemic in American history. The surge is fueled by opioid abuse. Opioids are pain-killing drugs which depress the central nervous system and are profoundly physically addictive. Some, like oxycodone and morphine, can be legally prescribed by doctors and are. Others, like heroin, are banned by law. In 2015, opioids accounted for nearly 2/3 of the 52,000 Americans killed by drug overdoses. Every day they take the lives of 91 more Americans. That's about twice the number of Americans killed per day at the height of the war in Vietnam. A big part of the problem is availability. In 12 states, mostly across the Midwest and the South, the number of opioid painkiller prescriptions exceeds the number of residents who live there. In New Hampshire, for example, a state of 1.3 million people, 13 million doses of opioids were dispensed within a single 3-month period. In West Virginia, meanwhile, the opioid overdose rate is more than 40 per 100,000 people. To put that in perspective, that's more than 20 times worse than the peak of the crack cocaine epidemic. The crisis is an American problem. Americans consumed 81% of the global supply of oxycodone and almost 100% of the supply of hydrocodone. Those are the active ingredients in some of the most popular prescription painkillers. Once hooked, addicts looking for a better or cheaper high overwhelmingly turned to the black market. 4 out of 5 heroin users started with prescription painkillers. As the number of prescription painkillers rises, it should come as no surprise that the popularity of heroin rises too, and it does. That's why, since 2002, the number of heroin addicts in the U.S. has increased by 500%. All of which brings us back to Montgomery County, Ohio. That county's biggest city, Dayton, ranks #1 in the country for drug ODs and is widely considered the heroin capital of America. In the state of Ohio, 3,310 people died of accidental drug overdoses in 2015 alone. That's more than the number of people killed on 9/11. Christopher Caldwell is a senior editor at the Weekly Standard. He's author of what I think is the single best overview of the opioid crisis yet written. It's called American Carnage, and it's on our Facebook page. Please go to that. He joins us now in the studio. Chris, great to see you.
Great to see you too, Tucker.
So what are the factors that led to this crisis?
Well, you know, a lot recently, but more remotely. You know, the United States has had a very, very fraught relationship with pain relievers, which I think has to do with the way a few things came together in the 19th century. Around the same time, you had the isolation of morphine, which comes from an opium poppy. It's the great opioid, morphine. You had the invention of the hypodermic needle, and you had the Civil War. And I think a lot of people came back from the Civil War addicted, and doctors became very enthusiastic about the pain-killing properties of this drug. And so they started to prescribe it kind of promiscuously. And by the First World War, the United States had a big problem with it and voted to ban it. And there was a real taboo about opioids.
And that changed. We had a problem in the late 60s and 70s, soldiers coming back from Vietnam addicted to this stuff. But the crisis now dwarfs that. And part of the reason, as you write in this fantastic piece, is that our attitudes about pain relief changed, and that was in part the result of lobbying.
I think that's right. I mean, there was a problem with drugs in the 1960s. There was a great popularity of them. But heroin was not really part of it. Hippies didn't do heroin. There was this specific problem in Vietnam, but that was very confined, and it was a very localized thing. It was in the 90s that a number of corporations began lobbying and actually spending a lot of money on PR for a more liberal attitude towards pain relief, treating the relief of pain as a kind of a human right, and also talking about pain as a kind of a fifth vital sign, I think is what they called it. And in 1996, Purdue Pharmaceuticals brought out OxyContin, which was a special way of delivering the opioid oxycodone. It would deliver time release, so you could pack a lot into a pill, but because it entered the system slowly, it was thought not to be so dangerous. But addicts would, you know, they'd crush them or they'd bite them, and you could release the whole thing at the same time and get high. And on top of that, these things tended to be wildly overprescribed. I mean,
wildly overprescribed.
Yeah, yes.
But here's what I don't understand. So opioids are physically addictive. The more that reach a community, the higher the addiction rate. I mean, there's a pretty clear relationship here. Why has the federal government, which oversees this through the FDA, not shut it down?
Well, I don't know how you shut it down. You know, I mean, you mean to sort of to ban opioids, to stop?
Well, or to ban the promiscuous prescription of them in ways that are clearly detrimental to the society.
That has tended to be a state responsibility, and I think the states are really beginning to do it. And certainly some of the states that I visited for this article, like Rhode Island and Maine, now have, in their very different ways, pretty serious regimes for sort of cracking down on the overprescription of these.
What happened at Purdue Pharma? Did it make any money on this?
I believe they made a good deal of money on it. I think the Sackler family, which owns Purdue Pharma, is on the, I think they're number 16 on the list of the Forbes richest families.
Just from selling OxyContin?
I believe the lion's share of their businesses, of Purdue Pharma's businesses in OxyContin, yeah.
We've got 30 seconds left. If you were to do one thing to stop this, not to treat the people currently addicted, but to prevent more people from becoming addicted, what would it be?
I think that there is a big problem with fentanyl, which is an artificial opioid that can be made in the lab, coming in from both China and Mexico. I think that things can be done to interdict it.
And that is the deadliest of all the opioids and derivatives?
Well, it's about 50 times as strong as normal heroin. And dealers like to cut it by a factor of 50, so it's normal, but they don't always do a good job, and so it's highly unpredictable and it leads to a lot of overdoses.
I can tell. Christopher Caldwell, the piece is American Carnage. It's on our Facebook page. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, the head of a left-wing magazine says the attack on Syria was particularly offensive to Native Americans. You can't even imagine why, so stay tuned because we'll tell you. Well, did you find Hillary Clinton to be corrupt, phony, unlikable, amoral, perhaps even evil? Apparently millions of people did, and Clinton herself has a theory about why. She says she was just too successful, and we crushed that in America. During an interview at a recent women's forum, Mrs. Clinton said this.
With men, success and ambition are correlated with likability. So the more successful a man is, the more likable he becomes. With a woman, guess what? It's the exact opposite. So the more successful and therefore ambitious a woman is, the less likable she becomes.
How stupid is that theory? Let me put it this way. We're going to disprove it right now by bringing on two successful and deeply likable women. Ashley Pratt is a contributor at U.S. News & World Report. Gabby Margiello is White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Welcome to you both. Ashley, first to you. This theory doesn't, I mean, this theory basically is a cousin of every other theory for the loss, which is anyone who voted against her is like morally suspect, like you're a sexist.
Yeah, I think what's so fascinating about this to begin with is that her likability numbers were just horrible to begin with. She was a terrible candidate. No matter how you slice it or dice it, she was never going to win. And somebody like Trump, who most people also did not like, was able to win because she was so unlikable. So it's like this election was hers to lose by a landslide. And there were a lot of women, including myself, who would love to see a female president. I just don't want Hillary Clinton to be the first female president. So, I don't know. Maybe I am a horrible person for saying
I think you're a deeply good person, Ashley. So, Gabby, I guess what cracked me up most is the idea that people didn't like her because she was successful. And I don't want to be mean. She was Secretary of State. That's fine. Appointed position. Mm-hmm. In what sense was she, like, so wildly successful, though?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, if you watch this interview, there was an egregious lack of self-awareness in what she was explaining, saying that that misogyny cost her the election, that somehow her own success, whether as Secretary of State, as First Lady, as the wife of President Bill Clinton, somehow cost her the election. I mean, this is not true. The fact that Hillary Clinton, the reason that Hillary Clinton lost this election was because she demonized the husbands, the sons, the brothers of women in the Rust Belt region who related to her opponent.
Right. Because she's a hater.
Because 61% of Americans couldn't label her trustworthy. I mean, because she deployed surrogates like Lena Dunham and Madeleine Albright, who told women that they could go to hell if they didn't vote for the first female presidential nominee.
If you don't like me, you're a bad person. No. It's not my problem. You're a bad person. It's not me, it's you. All right. The editor-in-chief of the magazine Mother Jones, liberal magazine, said President Trump's attack on Syria is, among other things, offensive to Native Americans. Here's the reasoning. Her name is Clara Jeffrey. She says she's certain that many American Indians are, quote, enraged that Tomahawk cruise missiles use the name of a traditional Algonquin weapon. Ashley, I don't know if, you're
like,
part of the
I'm
Algonquin
like this much Native American,
yeah, okay.
kind of like Elizabeth Warren.
Then you're qualified to weigh in on this.
I think what I'm going to say here, a lot of people probably won't like. I think the other day I was never Trump during the election, and I came away from that thinking, wow, he actually did something that I am 100% behind. He sent a clear message to Assad. I think that in one of those moments, we had a lot of people on the right actually calling him a neocon, which was a very interesting revelation, I think, because it was like, where is this coming from? But now to take it in this direction seems a little crazy because there were a lot of Hillary Clinton supporters who said if Hillary did this, we would have been supportive of it.
I know. Well, all the never-Trumpers love the Syria strike. But I would say this, though. This was a serious thing, no matter what side you're on. Mm-hmm. And to reduce it to kind of the dumbest identity politics and safe space rhetoric about Tomahawk,
well, obviously
that's not a serious critique.
No, it's not a serious critique, and the liberal journalist who tweeted this out didn't do her research, because if she had, she would be aware of the fact that the U.S. military names our helicopters. The Army's 2nd Infantry's insignia is an Indian chief. We name them after Indian Americans out of respect for and recognition of the warrior spirit of the Indian American. I mean, this is written into law.
But that's offensive.
It's not offensive. I mean, this is the same thing that Harry Reid did when he was on the Senate floor, suggesting that the Redskins change their name.
As a Scandinavian, I'm all for the Viking stuff, by the way. I think it's a big compliment. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Up next, we bring you some disturbing information about the future of Christianity in Europe. It's in trouble. Stay tuned. Well, almost 1,300 years ago, Charles Martel defeated the Moors at the Battle of Tours, and Europe has safely been a Christian continent ever since. But suddenly, without a shot being fired, all of that is changing, and changing fast. The Christian faith is dying in Europe. According to new numbers from Pew Research, between 2010 and 2015, there were 5.6 million more deaths than births among that continent's Christian population. The decline does not even include the loss of people from quitting church on their own, which is considerable. Meanwhile, Europe's Muslim population has exploded. During the same period, the number of European Muslims grew by 2.3 million, a combination of much higher birth rates and a wave of immigration from the Middle East. Well, the transition is already altering the basic culture of the continent. Just this week in the UK, the charity National Trust dropped the word Easter from its annual Easter egg hunt, saying it wanted to be inclusive of all religions. These trends are not limited to Europe, by the way. They are global. Worldwide, 31% of the planet is now Christian and 24% is Muslim. Islam is gaining ground fast, though. At the current pace, it will become the world's largest religion in fewer than 50 years. Now, that's great news if you believe Western civilization is so sinful that it deserves to be destroyed and replaced by something different, as many on the left believe. But what if you don't believe that? Well, good luck to you. That's it for us tonight. Sean Hannity is next. We will see you tomorrow. Have a great night.